All right, so you want the deep dive into how Aristotle viewed the soul. Okay, get ready, because we're going to tackle some seriously big ideas from, like, one of the most influential thinkers ever.
And you might want to set aside any images of ghosts or anything like that, because Aristotle's idea of the soul is about getting to the bottom of what life is, from the tiniest little plants to the crazy stuff going on in the human mind.
Exactly. And we're going to be using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on Aristotle's psychology as our guide, and that's like the ultimate authority when it comes to academic philosophy. Okay, so let's get into it.
One of the fascinating things is that Aristotle believed that the soul is the form of a living being, and the body, that's the matter.
Form. That's kind of abstract. Could you, like, give me an example?
Imagine a statue. Let's say it's Hermes. The bronze, the stuff the statue is made of, that's the matter. And the actual shape of Hermes, the specific form it takes, that's the form. If you take away the form, all you have is a random lump of bronze. It's the form that makes it a statue of Hermes.
I see. So the soul is like the blueprint that shapes and gives structure to a living thing, like how the shape of Hermes defines the bronze statue. I think I'm getting it.
You got it. And here's where things get even more interesting. This isn't just about humans. For Aristotle, the soul is basically the principle of life itself. And that means his psychology covers everything that's alive, plants, animals, and of course us humans.
Wait a second. Are you saying a sunflower has a soul? That's kind of hard to imagine.
I know, it might sound a little strange at first, but Aristotle actually talked about different levels of soul, each with its own set of powers. He lays all this out in his book, De Anima, which means on the soul.
All right, now you've really got me curious. So what kind of soul does a sunflower have then?
Well, at the most basic level, there's something called the nutritive soul. This is what takes care of growth and reproduction. So it's what lets a sunflower take in nutrients, grow tall, and make those seeds so there's more sunflowers.
So that's the force that keeps the sunflower going through its whole life. Okay, I got that. But what about animals? What makes them different from plants in Aristotle's view?
Animals, on top of the nutritive soul, also have something called a perceptual soul. This is what lets them sense and interact with the world around them, things like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Those senses help animals find food, avoid danger, and go after what feels good.
Right, being able to experience what's around you is pretty important if you're an animal trying to survive. Makes sense. So where do humans fit into all of this? I mean, with our huge brains and all our complex thoughts, we must be at the top of the soul hierarchy, right?
Exactly. Humans have the most advanced type of soul, the intellectual soul. This is what separates us from all the other animals and lets us think, reason, understand big ideas, and make choices.
So it's like a ladder, with the nutritive soul on the bottom rung, the perceptual soul in the middle, and then the intellectual soul way up at the top. Each level gets more complex and powerful. Pretty cool system, right?
You got it. That hierarchical structure is a big part of Aristotle's system. It shows how all the different forms of life are connected and also highlights what makes each type of soul special.
Okay, this is blowing my mind already. But here's the thing. How does this form actually let us perceive the world? Like, does the soul reach out and grab info, kind of like a hand picking an apple from a tree?
That's where it gets really interesting. Aristotle explains perception as a type of change that happens inside the person perceiving. The sense organs receive the form of the thing being perceived, not the actual matter.
So when I look at a tree, I'm not getting a tiny tree beamed into my eye, right?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
He uses this analogy of a seal being pressed into wax. The wax takes on the shape of the seal, but it doesn't become the seal itself, right? It just receives the form, the imprint.
Oh, I see. So when I'm looking at a tree, my eye gets the treeness, the basic
Yeah.
form of the tree, but my eye doesn't actually turn into a tree.
That's it. It's like your sense of sight is being shaped or molded by the form of the tree. Pretty amazing how Aristotle takes this super complex idea and makes it easier to grasp with these analogies.
So the actual tree stays out there in the world, but my sense of sight changes. It's informed by its form. I think I'm starting to get this.
And this isn't just for sight. All our senses work this way: hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, all of them. Each sense organ takes in the forms of different qualities in the world, which is what lets us experience how rich and diverse everything is.
This is making me completely rethink how I experience the world. It's like I'm always being shaped by the forms of the things around me. But wait, if our senses are just getting these impressions, these forms, how do we actually understand what we're sensing? How do we make sense of it all? That's got to be where the mind comes in, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us to maybe the coolest and most mysterious part of Aristotle's psychology, the mind. He called it nous. It's that part of us that tackles the big questions, figures out our experiences, and just wants to know and understand stuff.
Okay, tell me more about this nose thing. What makes it so special? What does it do that our senses can't?
Well, the nous is what lets us grasp universals, those concepts and principles that are like the foundation of how we understand things. Our senses can only perceive individual things, but the nous is what lets us see how those things are connected, to see patterns, and to form general ideas from our experiences.
So if I see this particular tree outside my window, my nous is what helps me understand the concept of tree in general, right? It's like
Well,
my mind is going beyond just that one tree and understanding the essence of what it means to be a tree.
exactly. That's what makes the nous so powerful. It lets us go from simply sensing the world to actually understanding it. It's how we learn, categorize info, and build a complete picture of reality.
Kind of like when you're learning a new language, right? At first, every word is totally new, but once you get the grammar, the rules behind the language, you can understand any new word you come across. The nous is like the grammar of how we understand the world.
That's a great way to put it. And it shows how the nous lets us move from the specific to the general, from concrete things to abstract ideas. It's what makes us rational.
This is so insightful. I gotta admit, though, I'm still struggling with the idea of the mind itself. If it's how we understand these universals, these abstract ideas, what is the mind made of? Like, what is its essence?
You've stumbled onto one of those classic philosophical puzzles. Aristotle himself wrestled with this question. He described the mind as nothing in actuality before thinking, which is kind of like saying the mind doesn't have a fixed form beforehand. It's pure potential just waiting to be activated.
So it's like a blank slate that gets written on by our experiences.
In a way, yes. Aristotle thought the mind takes on the forms of the things we think about. It's as if the mind itself is always being molded and shaped by the very act of thinking.
Hold on, if my mind is a blank slate, then what makes me me? What about my personality? All my little quirks and preferences.
That's a really good question. We're obviously not just blank slates. What makes you, you is a super complex mix of your experiences, memories, and importantly, your desires. It's all shaped by your intellectual soul.
So it's not passive. It's like this active back and forth with the world that shapes who we are. Our minds keep changing and growing as we encounter new ideas and have new experiences.
That's the cool thing about Aristotle's view of the soul. It recognizes that the mind has tons of potential and that our experiences play a huge role in who we become.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like if I'm really thirsty, my desire for water is going to make me get up and get a drink.
Yeah.
But it's got to be more than just basic needs, right? Like what about more complicated desires, like wanting to learn new stuff or wanting to help other people?
Those count too. For Aristotle, desire was this like incredible force that pushes us towards all kinds of things, from just staying alive to more complex stuff like knowledge, art, or even, being a really good person.
So our desires can be good or bad. I mean, like I might really want to eat a whole cake, even if I know it's probably not the best thing for me.
That's such a good point. Aristotle knew that not all desires are the same. Some desires, like wanting too much pleasure or wanting to be super rich, can lead you down the wrong path. But other desires, like wanting to learn new things or wanting to be fair and just, those can lead to a much happier life.
This is making me think about Aristotle's idea of virtue. Didn't he think that developing a virtuous character was super important for living a good life?
You got it. For Aristotle, virtue is about having the right kinds of desires, the ones that are in line with reason and will help you live a really fulfilling life. It's not about getting rid of all your desires. It's more about learning how to channel them in a way that's good for you and for everyone else.
So it's about finding that balance between what we want and what our rational minds tell us is good.
Exactly. It's like imagine a chariot driver trying to control two really powerful horses. The horses, those are our desires, and they can be strong and kind of wild. The charioteer, that's our reason, and it's got to learn how to guide and direct those desires so they're both working together.
Wow, that's a powerful image. It really shows how our desires and our reason can sometimes be in conflict. Like that internal struggle when you know you should do something, but your desires are kind of pulling you in a different direction.
That's exactly it. It's just part of being human, that tension between what we want and what we know is right. And Aristotle believed that figuring out how to handle this tension was key to developing a good character.
This is starting to feel really relevant to like everyday life. It's not just some abstract philosophy thing. It's like a framework for understanding how we make decisions and deal with all the complexities of being human.
That's one of the things that makes Aristotle so timeless. He really gets to the heart of what it means to be a creature that thinks, feels, and acts in the world.
Okay, this has been mind-blowing so far, but we've covered a ton, from the different levels of the soul to how complex the mind is and the role of desire. Before we move on, can we just, do a quick recap of the main points we've talked about Aristotle's view of the soul?
Sure, a recap's always a good idea. Here's some key takeaways. First, Aristotle thought the soul is the form of a living thing. It's what gives life, structure, and purpose to the body. Second, the soul has different levels, from the nutritive soul that plants have to the intellectual soul that humans have. It's through our intellectual soul that we can reason and understand the world around us. Third, we're driven by desires, but those desires can be good or bad. Cultivating good, virtuous desires is super important if you want to live a really fulfilling life. And lastly, we've got to find that balance between what we want and what our rational minds tell us is good. Let our reason guide our desires toward what's truly good.
Perfect. Thanks for that. It really helps put all those ideas together. Speaking of the mind, you mentioned something called the active intellect earlier. Can we dive a little deeper into that? It sounded really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Remember how we talked about the nous, that part of the mind that gets those universal concepts? Well, Aristotle actually made a distinction between two parts of the nous, the passive intellect and the active intellect.
The passive intellect and the active intellect. They sound super different. So what's the difference?
The passive intellect is like that part of your mind that receives forms when you think. It's kind of like an empty canvas just waiting for an artist to paint on it.
But a canvas can't paint itself, right? There has to be something or someone who actually does the painting. Is that where the active intellect comes in?
Exactly. The active intellect is what does the real work of abstracting and understanding. It takes the stuff our senses give us and turns it into knowledge.
So, like using your earlier example, if the passive intellect takes in the form of a tree, the active intellect is what lets me understand the idea of tree in general.
Exactly. It helps us see how things are connected, spot patterns, and come up with general concepts from all our individual experiences. Imagine a chef taking different ingredients and making a delicious meal. The active intellect is kind of like the master chef of our minds, taking all that sensory information and turning it into a way we understand the world.
That's such a good analogy. So the passive intellect is like receiving things, like a blank canvas or an empty bowl. And the active intellect is all about creating and being active, like an artist or a chef. This makes me think about how we learn. Did Aristotle think we're born with those universal concepts already in our minds, or do we learn them through experience?
That's a question that's been bugging philosophers forever. Aristotle himself seemed to think that the active intellect is something we're born with, like an ability to understand that's just built in. But it's not that simple.
So it's not exactly a blank slate then.
Not really. It's more like the active intellect gives us the basic framework for understanding, but then it's all the stuff we experience in the world that fills in the details. Imagine building a house. The active intellect is like the blueprint, but it's the bricks, the wood, and all the work the builders do that actually make the house real.
Okay, so our senses give us information, our passive intellect takes in those forms, and then our active intellect does all the hard work of processing it, making connections, and ultimately turning it into knowledge.
Yeah.
It's like this super interesting dance between what we're born with and what we learn, between our potential and what we actually experience in the world.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Aristotle saw the soul as this dynamic thing that's always changing, always interacting with the world, and constantly shaping itself through all those experiences.
I really like how his philosophy combines these really big, abstract ideas with a very grounded understanding of how we learn and grow. But there's still this question about how the soul and the body are related. We've been talking about the soul as the form of the body, but it still feels kind of mysterious. Why does something that isn't physical, like the soul, interact with something that is physical, like the body?
Ah, the million-dollar question, right? It's been stumping philosophers for ages. Aristotle knew how tough this question was, and he used a great analogy to try to explain it. Imagine an axe.
Okay, an axe? I'm picturing it. What do axes have to do with the soul and the body?
Think about what an axe is for. What's its purpose?
To chop wood, obviously.
Right. But imagine if the axe was made of something super flimsy, like cotton candy. Could it still chop wood?
No way.
Yeah.
It would just fall apart the second it hit the wood.
Exactly. Whether the axe can do its job depends on what it's made of, its physical structure. Now think of the body like the axe and the soul, like the axe's ability to chop wood. The soul is the form, the thing that organizes the body and makes it work like a living thing.
So the soul isn't like some separate ghost thing floating around. It's what gives the body its ability to be alive, to sense things, to think.
You got it. Aristotle's saying that the soul and the body are totally connected. You can't have one without the other. They're two sides of the same coin.
This makes me see how Aristotle thought of the soul as being part of the material world, not something supernatural or separate from our physical bodies.
That's it. Aristotle wasn't a dualist. He didn't believe the mind and body were totally separate things. For him, the soul is what makes the body a living, breathing, experiencing being. It's what gives us life, makes us who we are, and connects us to everything around us.
That's a really powerful way to think about ourselves and where we fit in the universe. It shows how important it is to understand both the body and the mind and see them as parts of one whole.
You hit the nail on the head. Aristotle's approach reminds us that we're not just minds stuck inside bodies, we're embodied beings, and our souls are basically what make us that way.
It's like trying to understand how a bird flies without thinking about its wings. You can't separate the two.
A perfect analogy. Aristotle's philosophy brings together the physical and the mental, the material and the immaterial, in a beautiful way. It's a holistic view of what it means to be human.
Wow, this is so fascinating. I have to admit, my brain is feeling a bit full, though. We've covered so much today, from the basics of the soul to all the complexities of the active intellect and the relationship between the soul and the body. Maybe we should take a little break and let everything sink in before we go on.
Yeah, good idea. It's good to stop and think about these ideas for a bit. They're pretty deep, and it takes time to really process them all. Maybe we can pick up where we left off next time.
Sounds good to me. I'm definitely eager to hear more about what Aristotle thought about desire and how it's connected to virtues and vices. That seems like where his psychology really gets into the nitty-gritty of living a good life.
You're going to love it. Aristotle had some incredibly smart things to say about what motivates us, how we act, and what it means to be happy. I think you'll find it both enlightening and surprisingly relevant to your own life.
Okay, so last time we were talking about how Aristotle thought the soul and body worked together, like an axe, and its ability to chop wood.
Right, that was a good analogy. It really helps us picture how he could see the soul as something not physical, but still totally tied to the body.
It definitely makes his view easier to grasp, but I'm still thinking about how all of this plays out in our lives, day to day. We were just getting into talking about desire and how it fits into his whole idea of psychology.
Well, Aristotle believed that desire is kind of like the engine that drives all our actions. It's what pushes us toward things we see as good and away from the things we see as bad.
So it's not just our logical minds making all the decisions. Our desires have a big influence too.
Totally. Aristotle thought that desire is actually what gets our minds going in the first place. It's like the fuel that makes the engine of our actions run.
Okay, I get that. If I'm starving, my desire for food is going to make me start thinking about what to eat, where to find it, how to cook it. My mind's working, but it's my desire that's pushing the whole process along.
Exactly. And it's not just about those basic needs like being hungry or thirsty. This applies to all kinds of desires like wanting to learn, wanting to have friends, or even wanting to be a good person.
So some desires are good and some are bad, right?
Yeah.
Like I might really want to eat a whole bag of chips, but I know it's not good for me.
That's a great point. Aristotle knew that all desires aren't the same. Some desires, like wanting too much pleasure or wanting tons of money, can actually lead you in the wrong direction. But other desires, like wanting to learn or wanting to do the right thing, those can help you live a better life.
This makes me think about Aristotle's idea of virtue. Didn't he believe that becoming a virtuous person was super important for living a good life?
Absolutely. He thought that virtue was all about having the right kinds of desires, those desires that line up with reason and that lead to a fulfilling life. It's not about getting rid of all desires. It's more about learning how to channel them so that they're good for you and for everyone else.
So it's about finding a balance between what we want and what our rational minds tell us is good.
Yeah, exactly. It's like imagine a gardener taking care of their plants. They don't just let everything grow wild, right? They prune, they weed, they make sure the plants have everything they need to thrive. Virtue is like that. It's about taking care of our desires, getting rid of the harmful ones, and helping the good ones grow.
I like that analogy. It makes me think about how important our upbringing and education are in shaping the kinds of desires we have. If we're around good influences and learn to value the things that are truly good, we're more likely to develop those virtuous desires, right?
That's a great point. Aristotle thought moral education was essential for developing a virtuous character. He saw it as this process of getting into good habits, of choosing to do the right thing over and over until it becomes natural.
So it's not enough to just know what's right. We actually have to practice being virtuous until it becomes part of who we are.
That's it. Think about learning to play a musical instrument. It takes time, effort, and lots of practice to get good enough to create beautiful music. Virtue is kind of similar. It needs to be cultivated and refined.
This all feels really grounded and relatable to everyday life. It's not just abstract philosophy. It's like a guide for navigating all the challenges of being human.
I think that's one of the best things about Aristotle's work. It comes from a deep understanding of what it means to be human with all our strengths and weaknesses, and it gives us a way to live a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
This deep dive has been incredible. It feels like we've discovered a whole new way of understanding ourselves and the world around us. If we had to sum up Aristotle's view of the soul for our listeners, what would be the most important things to remember?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that Aristotle saw the soul as the very essence of what makes something alive. It's what gives the body life, structure, and purpose. It's not some separate ghostly thing, but something at the core of our being.
And the soul has these different levels of complexity, from the basic soul that plants have to the intellectual soul that's unique to humans.
You got it. And through our intellectual soul, we're able to think, reason, and make sense of the world. But we're not just thinking machines. We're also driven by desires, and they play a huge part in motivating us to act.
And it's about learning to develop those good, virtuous desires, the ones that are in tune with reason, because that's a big part of living a good life.
Exactly. Aristotle's psychology is like this beautifully woven tapestry of ideas that all connect together to give us a complete picture of what it means to be human.
This journey through Aristotle's psychology has been truly eye-opening. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on myself and the world.
It's been awesome exploring these ideas with you, and the crazy thing is we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover in all of Aristotle's work.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. Maybe this will inspire them to go on their own deep dives into Aristotle's ideas. After all, as Aristotle himself said, all men by nature desire to know.
And what better way to satisfy that desire than by exploring the thoughts of one of history's greatest philosophers, right?
So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never lose that thirst for knowledge. Until next time, happy philosophizing.